Come to order. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the field hearing of the U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. We are thrilled to be here at Clatsop Community College in Astoria, Oregon. It's wonderful to be out of Washington, D.C. and out and about to listen to experts when it comes to the climate crisis. We're thrilled to be here with a climate champion, Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, who has been instrumental on our committee in tackling climate solutions, especially when it comes to ocean health, workforce, and education. So thank you, Rep. Bonamici, very much for inviting us out and hosting us. I need to go through some housekeeping matters before we dive into the hearing and opening statements. So here we go. As a reminder, members participating in a hearing remotely should be visible on camera throughout the hearing. We may have some members zooming in virtually, but we'll see if that happens or not. Members are responsible for controlling their own microphones. Members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. As a reminder, statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository to sccc.repository@mail.house.gov. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform the committee staff immediately. Well, good morning again, and thank you all for joining our hybrid hearing. Today we are thrilled to be in Astoria, Oregon, to hear from state, local, and tribal partners on their experiences addressing the climate crisis, particularly challenges facing coastal communities and the opportunities that they see in building more climate resilient coasts. All of the three members here in attendance today all represent coastal communities. I represent the Tampa Bay area back in the state of Florida. My good friend, Congressman Buddy Carter, represents a beautiful part of the country, the entire coastline of the state of Georgia, so the southern Atlantic coast, and of course, Congresswoman Bonamici. We've already had a remarkable visit here in Oregon, by the way, and I want to thank Oregon State Parks for hosting us yesterday on the gorgeous coastline here at Ecola State Park down to Indian Beach. It's a remarkable, beautiful place that we know we need to protect going forward. Rep. Bonamici, I want to thank you, first of all, for being such a climate champion. Not just for the state of Oregon, but for helping the Select Committee and the Congress chart the course on policy. And let me also say to all of the Oregonians, our hearts are with you. I know this is kind of a poignant time as we're coming out of another deadly heat wave, reminding us that the climate crisis is here and now, and it's underscoring the urgent need for action. So today we're thrilled to listen to leaders from this beautiful region whose work is crucial to building resilience, conserving habitats, and preserving the way of life here in Oregon and the entire Pacific Northwest. And we're grateful for the chance to hear their perspectives as we work to prepare coastal communities across America for the risks and impacts of the climate emergency. Coastal ecosystems are crucial in our fight to solve the climate crisis. Mangroves, marshes, seagrasses and other coastal habitats absorb huge amounts of heat-trapping carbon, storing it below the surface and helping to keep temperatures in check. In fact, these habitats sequester more carbon pollution per area than any habitat on land. They also work to mitigate the impacts from intense hurricanes, storm surge, and other climate-fueled threats. But our coastal communities need help. Decreased oxygen, changes in water flow, and other climate impacts are threatening our coast, impacting the lives and livelihoods of the millions of Americans who live in coastal counties. Sea levels are rising in communities like my own in the Tampa Bay area, threatening our economies and disrupting our way of life. And our ocean, which has absorbed between 1/5 and 1/3 of all human-caused carbon pollution since the 1980s, is warming at an alarming rate. We know that coastal ecosystems play a key role in keeping global temperatures in check, which is why we must take steps to conserve these crucial habitats as part of our work to make our communities more resilient against the climate crisis. Each coastal community is special. From the Gulf Coast to the South Atlantic to the Pacific Northwest, our coasts are home to unique cultures and diverse local economies. And for that reason, we know that federal opportunities for climate action need to be regionally focused, culturally appropriate, and tailored to each community's environment. And Congress plays a key role in supporting broad investments in coastal resilience, and the federal government should work with local, regional, and tribal partners to develop solutions that fit their communities. President Biden and Congress already have taken important steps with last year's infrastructure law, and last week the Congress passed the bipartisan science in manufacturing legislation that Congresswoman Bonamici was central to passing in the Congress. And now we're at a point where we are hopeful that our Senate colleagues will send us additional investments in clean energy and climate solutions maybe over the next week. Addressing climate risks in coastal communities will also require that we look beyond the coastline. We must address all parts of the ecosystem, from far upstream to the open ocean, and tackle each challenge along the way. That's why expanding access to data and ongoing monitoring are essential for helping local partners make key decisions, and that's why we're grateful to hear from our witnesses today as we implement adaptation and mitigation measures across the country. I'm now thrilled to yield time to my good friend, the climate champion from the Pacific Northwest, Representative Bonamici.
Well, thank you so much, Chair Castor, and I want to welcome my colleagues on the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis to the majestic Oregon coast. And thank you again to President Breitmeyer and Clatsop Community College for hosting us today, and also to Helen Keefe from the college and all the staff here, and to the staff of the Select Committee and the staff from my office for their help organizing this important field hearing. The health of the ocean reflects the health of our planet. Clean beaches and waterways are critical to marine ecosystems and the coastal industries that rely on them. The ocean regulates weather and climate, and its waves and winds generate renewable energy. Today, our ocean and coastlines are threatened more than ever. The ocean has absorbed a significant amount of heat from human-caused global warming and has also absorbed up to 1/3 of all carbon dioxide emissions. As the ocean continues absorbing heat, sea surface temperatures and climate patterns will change and sea levels will rise. By absorbing carbon dioxide, the ocean and estuaries become more acidic, destabilizing fisheries and threatening coastal communities and ecosystems. I'm very excited, as the chair mentioned, that my bipartisan Coastal and Ocean Acidification Research and Innovation Act was recently sent to the President's desk as part of the historic CHIPS and Science Act. This will help coastal communities continue to address these challenges by strengthening investments in research and monitoring, and by increasing our understanding of the socioeconomic consequences of inaction. We need to do more. Important actions we could and should take include investing in ocean-based climate solutions like blue carbon, building a stronger blue economy, and bolstering the health of our ecosystems to protect our coastal communities and marine industries. A healthy ocean is not a partisan issue. It's an area where we can and should and will work together to identify solutions and implement them. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about what we can learn from the work being done in Oregon to help our country address these critical issues. Thank you again, and I yield back to Chair Castor.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'm pleased to yield to the ranking Republican who's in attendance today, our good friend, Congressman Buddy Carter of Georgia. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing, and thanking all of you for being here, particularly you, Representative Bonamici. Thank you for hosting us in your beautiful district. And I have to tell you that I knew the physical features of this district were beautiful, but I was pleasantly surprised by the people that I've met in this area. If I didn't know better, I'd say I was in the South. And they really have been very, very nice, and we appreciate that very much. I'm also pleased to see how much Oregon and Georgia's first districts have in common, despite being almost entirely on opposite sides of the country. Both are situated on the coast of our states. Yesterday, we visited the Electric Island, where we saw innovation in electric vehicle charging. In my district, it's been announced that Hyundai will be bringing an EV and battery manufacturing facility to our district. We're very excited about that, so it was good to see what I saw here yesterday. Both of our districts also have significant ports, and that's very important as well. During our visit there yesterday, we were able to see another common point with the importance of forest and forest products. I look forward to spending more time discussing that important issue today, especially with our witness here, Ms. Bell from Westerville Ecological Services. This trip has given us the opportunity to see every part of what I describe as the three things that we need to approach climate change. That is innovation, adaptation, and mitigation. All of those are extremely important. Unfortunately, instead of pursuing productive bipartisan policies in each of these areas, we are again seeing my colleagues across the aisle attempt to do it along with a massive reconciliation spending deal. Last week, Senate Democrats announced a package that includes over $400 billion in new spending for climate and health care, while increasing the tax burden on the American people. It proposes $300 billion in taxes just as we find ourselves in a recession. These taxes will hit every American. The Joint Committee on Taxation finds that average tax rates will increase for nearly every income category in 2023 under the bill, directly violating the President's promise to not raise taxes on those earning less than $400,000. Taxes will rise by $16.7 billion in 2023 on Americans earning less than $200,000 a year. Taxpayers earning between $200,000 and $500,000 will pay $14.1 billion more. What's worse is that as Americans face the highest energy prices in my lifetime, the bill would lead to even higher energy prices. The legislation would reinstate and increase a long-lapse tax on crude and imported petroleum products to 16.4 cents per gallon. It also includes a natural gas tax that will further increase prices. Higher energy prices are simply a regressive tax on those who can afford it the least in our country. Despite its name as the Inflation Reduction Act, studies show the impact on inflation is statistically indistinguishable from zero. There isn't even any deficit reduction in the bill until 2027. The whole reason we find ourselves with increased inflation is because there is too much demand with too many dollars chasing too few products. More taxes and regulations from this bill are just more restrictions on the American economy to produce and grow. 49.7% of the tax would be borne by the manufacturing industry. The National Association of Manufacturers says the tax in 2023 alone will reduce real GDP by $68.5 billion and cut labor income by $17.1 billion. Of course, the ones who are not affected by the anti-competitive tax increases are those benefiting from the Green New Deal tax credits, picking the winners and losers of American energy. What baffles me the most is that there are parts of this bill that we can agree on. There are parts of this bill we can't agree on, but they are being forced through as part of the massive glut of partisan policies are contradicted by other parts of the bill. There's a natural gas tax, but more lease sales for drilling on federal lands. There's an agreement on permitting reform and expansion of the 45Q carbon sequestration credit, but increases the cost of fossil fuel production. Clearly, there are certain policies we can agree on that move us in the right direction, but it disappoints me that we can't move forward in a way that keeps Americans competitive and energy costs affordable for families. We cannot continue to handicap ourselves while the true problem lies abroad. Of course, the topic of today's hearing is building climate-resilient coastal communities with a focus on the work being done here in Oregon. We've seen some fascinating things so far, and I'm eager to hear from the witnesses on some bipartisan lessons we can take from this trip, especially the role working forests have in providing climate solutions and growing our economy. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Well, thank you, Mr. Carter. And I look forward to getting into a discussion of the Inflation Reduction Act and the fact that it does not raise taxes on anyone with incomes less than $400,000. It really just closes the loopholes targeted at the largest corporations. But we'll get to that debate because I know everyone here would like to dive into policy and debate on climate solutions. So at this time, Rep. Bonamici, I'm going to turn to you to ask you to introduce our witnesses today.
Thank you, Chair Castor. I will introduce our witnesses. First, Ms. Asia Dakota is the Executive Director of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, which works to provide a unified tribal voice in the management of Columbia River Basin fishery resources. Ms. Dakota is a citizen of the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakama Nation. She has more than 20 years of experience working on natural resource management in the Columbia River Basin. Next, Ms. Tyler Bell is Director for the Rocky Mountain region at Westervelt Ecological Services. Ms. Bell primarily oversees the organization's restoration site planning and development, agency relations and coordination, business development, and management of regional staff. She has more than 7 years of experience working on wetland and stream mitigation projects and other private sector environmental restoration projects. Dr. Elaine Placido is the Executive Director for the Lower Columbia River Estuary Partnership, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the restoration and care for the waters and ecosystems of the Lower Columbia River. Dr. Placido is a Coast Guard veteran and has 20-plus years of local government and nonprofit experience. And Dr. Francis Chan is the Director of the Cooperative Institute for Marine Ecosystem and Resources Studies and an Associate Professor in the Department of Integrative Biology at Oregon State University. His work focuses on coastal oceans, including causes and implications of nearshore low oxygen zones and of increasing ocean carbon levels. Dr. Chan also leads the Institute's research in conservation, protection, and restoration of marine resources.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Ms. Dakota, you are recognized for 5 minutes to summarize your testimony. Welcome.
Great. Good morning, Chair Castor, Ranking Member Carter, Representative Bonamici, and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to share a tribal perspective on the importance of addressing climate change and building resilient communities and natural systems to prepare for its impacts. I'm Asia Dakota, a citizen of the Yakama Nation and also the Executive Director of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, which is the coordinating fisheries agency of the Yakama, Umatilla, Warm Springs, and Nez Perce tribes, whose treaty reserve fishing rights cover large portions of the states of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Tribal cultures throughout North America hold thousands of years of observations and adaptations and traditional knowledge of our homelands. Here in the Columbia Plateau, we refer to this wisdom as Tmunwit, which is our word for the original natural law that governs the balance of life on Earth. It is a spiritual philosophy rooted in a reciprocal and life-giving relationship between human beings and the natural world around them. Understanding Tmunwit not only provides a sustainable relationship with nature, but also strengthens our bond to one another as community. For all that was taken or lost, especially for Native Americans, our relationship to the land and water remains, and so our natural resources are our cultural and community resources. At the heart of this relationship to the land are our sacred first foods: water, salmon, deer, roots, and huckleberries. The culture and subsistence of tribal members revolve around harvesting these foods, so any threats to them also pose a threat to our way of life. Climate change is such a threat. As this change gets worse, more and more of the basin's fish populations will be imperiled. Today, 42% of the Snake River spring and summer Chinook populations have reached quasi-extinction thresholds, and by 2025, only 3 years from now, 77% of the runs are estimated to reach that level. This is just one facet of how climate change will result in significant adverse impacts to tribal food security, cultural continuity, sovereignty, economic opportunities, ecosystem balance, human health, and environmental justice. To address this, the tribes, individually as well as cooperatively, have been hard at work to developing plans, programs, and systems to mitigate the changes that have already occurred and build resiliency to prepare for more severe impacts into the future. These innovative, successful programs benefit all people in the Northwest. Our holistic salmon restoration plan, called Waikanashmiwakishwit, combines multiple scientific fields and traditional ecological knowledge with a simple goal to put fish back in the rivers and protect the watersheds where fish live. It also addresses community development needs with the understanding that the well-being of our communities are tied to the well-being of our natural resources and the ecological services that they provide. Putting this plan into action over the past quarter century, the tribes have identified issues and potential solutions to help protect and restore salmon from the upper tributaries down the Columbia River main stem to the Pacific Ocean. Many of these issues involve migration difficulties through a warmer river system and the need for cold water refuges. The tribes are also concerned about climate change impacts on the ocean and the subsequent effects it has on salmon. An altered marine food web, acidification, hypoxia, sea level rise, and warming waters threaten to change ocean ecosystems in a way that may be detrimental to salmon or change their behavior. Long-term monitoring, both in estuaries and the ocean, are essential to observing and predicting what is happening. In 2020, CRITFIC joined this effort when we assumed stewardship of CMOP, the Center for Coastal Margin Observation and Prediction here in Astoria. CMOP is a nationally renowned ocean and estuary program researching the linkage between the Columbia River and the Pacific Ocean. Its research better informs tribal, state, and federal management decisions. Finally, we reiterate the importance of limiting global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees. This is the best case scenario to give us a chance to deal with the changes we are already experiencing. Implementing alternative energy sources are a major part of this effort. CRITFIC and its member tribes recognize that many of the threats that face salmon and lamprey are the result of energy production and consumption. This year, we released our latest tribal energy vision. As the region and nation undergo an energy transition to renewable resources, the tribes want to ensure that our electric power system supports healthy and harvestable fish and wildlife populations, protects tribal treaty and cultural resources, and provides clean, reliable, and affordable electricity. Tribes are disproportionately impacted by climate change due to our high dependence on first foods and relative vulnerability of our infrastructure. Yet tribes have been inequitably funded in natural resource and wildlife conservation. Stable, long-term funding streams are the greatest tool available to allow tribes to engage in direct climate impact decision-making and allow us to bring both our traditional ecological knowledge and contemporary science capacities to the management and policy tables for the shared benefit of everyone. Working together as partners, the federal government and tribes can successfully preserve, protect, and manage our lands, rivers, and resources from the impacts of climate change. This will benefit all of our future generations. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Ms. Dakota. Ms. Bell, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to provide a summary of your testimony. Good morning.
Thank you. Chairwoman Castor, Ranking Member Carter, and distinguished members of the House Select Committee on Climate Crisis, on behalf of the Westervelt Company, thank you for this opportunity to testify today. My name is Tyler Bell. I'm the Director of the Rocky Mountain region of Westervelt Ecological Services. Westervelt Ecological Services is a division of the Westervelt Company, a privately held, family-owned and operated business headquartered in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. At Westervelt Ecological Services, wetland, stream, and species mitigation is our business. Our high-quality conservation and mitigation projects include over 30,000 perpetually conserved acres. That's an area the size slightly larger than the city of Eugene, Oregon. The Westervelt Company was founded in 1884 and owns and manages over 600,000 acres of forested lands. At the Westervelt Company, sustainability is both our responsibility and our legacy. Our commitment to environmental, social, and leadership standards is proven through our voluntary sustainability reporting, and the Westervelt Company and Westervelt Ecological Services are examples of how private sector companies can be vital to national climate resiliency efforts. I'm here today to discuss the importance of working forests, wood products, and restored landscapes in climate resiliency, and the ways in which you can help the private sector create an even larger restoration footprint. U.S. forest and forest products offset 15% of U.S. industrial carbon emissions every year. Further, U.S. private working forests store an additional 82 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent. Westervelt's working forests alone store about 30.4 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. Forests produce wood products, which are 50% stored carbon by weight. Each year, wood products add an additional 100 million metric tons of carbon to the nearly 10 billion tons of carbon stored in wood products. That's nearly 3 times the carbon stored in all U.S. national parks combined. Our mitigation work furthers this commitment to stewardship. Compensatory mitigation is required when there's a permanent impact and loss of wetland or stream habitat. Westervelt is part of a larger mitigation and restoration industry that supports $25 billion in economic output and 225,000 jobs. We are a longstanding member of the Ecological Restoration Business Association, and we serve as technical experts in this association. In addition to sharing the importance of working forests and wood products to climate health, I'm here today to ask that the federal government support the private restoration industry in 2 ways. 1, access to public restoration dollars. Congress can incentivize and enlist the expertise, lands, and upfront capital of the private sector to meet the urgency of the climate change challenge. Privately funded mitigation providers have a proven record of working well with the U.S. government to achieve development goals. Allowing private sector participation in public restoration initiatives will create jobs and revenue for the communities in which they occur. It will also develop robust standards and accountability. This is partly because the private sector is accustomed to performance-based contracting, where a private company is paid upon proven delivery of an ecological outcome. This model stretches out the use of public dollars and places risk of ecological success or failure on the private sector. My second ask is the development of streamlined regulations and guidance. It's critical that industry and government work together to develop streamlined regulations. Without efficient permitting for infrastructure, investors withdraw from private mitigation solutions. This slows the permitting of projects, increases regulator staff time evaluating individual mitigation plans, and has negative consequences for the environment. Working with the government to develop stable policy will offer the regulatory certainty needed for private sector investment and mitigation options. In conclusion, the Westervelt Company has contributed over 600,000 acres of working forest. Our wood products contribute vital carbon storage benefits, and our 30,000-acre mitigation portfolio is part of a broader $25 billion industry. To continue to grow these efforts, we need your assistance in including the private sector in delivery of publicly funded restoration projects. We also need to collaboratively develop streamlined regulations. Thank you again for conducting this hearing. The Westervelt Company stands ready as a resource to this committee as it addresses important challenges of climate change and the solutions that private industry can offer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. Next up, Dr. Chan, you are recognized for 5 minutes to provide a summary of your testimony. Good morning.
Thank you, Chair Castor. Thank you, Representative Carter and Bonamici, for this opportunity to speak to you today about the role of science and partnership in building climate-resilient coastal communities. I'm Francis Chan. I'm an associate professor at Oregon State University, OSU, where I conduct research on ocean chemistry and ecology. I'm also the director of the joint NOAA-OSU Cooperative Institute for Marine Ecosystem and Resources Studies, which was established to enable the two-way flow of expertise between federal partners and academic scientists. I've spent 2 decades studying changes in Oregon's coastal ocean. This field hearing could not be more timely. Oregon's coastal communities and industries are really on the front lines of ocean climate change. If we drive down the coast, we can talk with Sue Cudd and Mark Weigert, owners of the Whiskey Creek Shellfish Hatchery, about how an acidifying ocean almost put them out of business. We now have heat waves in the sea that turn a normally productive ocean food web that has long allowed salmon to thrive to one where juvenile salmon have trouble finding enough food to survive. We also know that a warming ocean also gives rise to oxygen-poor or hypoxic zones. Along our coast, oxygen levels can drop to concentrations so low that Dungeness crab, our most valuable fishery on the West Coast, can suffocate in the pots of fishermen before they're brought to market. Just as we have wildfire seasons that start earlier and spread farther on land because of climate change, we now have a hypoxia season that returns to our coastal waters each year. The climate crisis is not a far horizon event for us. It's an everyday challenge for people on the Oregon coast. And along our coast, you also find residents, scientists, fishermen, and resource managers rolling up their sleeves to find solutions to this crisis. Coastal Oregonians are doing this by taking advantage of the best available science and by working together. At Whiskey Creek, OSU researchers supplied hatchery managers with state-of-the-art seawater carbon dioxide sensors that have allowed them to stay in business. Further down the coast in Newport, you'll find NOAA and OSU scientists working side by side with commercial fishermen to track ocean conditions and the health of juvenile salmon. This information gives us an invaluable look ahead into what the salmon fishery can expect to see in adult returns up to 4 years ahead. And with NOAA's support, I've been able to work with the blue high-tech industry to develop a cheaper, smarter, and tougher oxygen sensor that crab fishermen put on their crab pots. The sensors plot oxygen levels every time the pot comes on deck, so the fishermen can see if they're working inside or outside of a hypoxic zone. This technology is bi-coastal. What we've developed is now in the hands of New England lobstermen who are tracking hypoxic zones that are rising in their fishing grounds as well. We have an opportunity to build on successes like these and go much farther. At OSU, researchers are working to stimulate a new marine climate insurance industry that could help seafood growers and harvesters be more climate resilient. On land, farmers have access to insurance products to safeguard their livelihoods against drought and other weather events. For fishermen, dealing with increasing marine heat waves or hypoxia, that's not an option, in part because insurers need good science that we don't have in hand to price risk. This is science that I know we can produce. In my own work, I'm collaborating with NOAA colleagues to develop tools that can make the Dungeness crab fishery a more climate-resilient fishery. Importantly, we're honored to have representatives from tribal nations and commercial fishing industry serve on our advisory board to make sure that we go after the most actionable options. Robust and diverse partnerships like this are the key to ensuring science is pointing in the right direction, and they are connecting the dots between climate, ecosystems, and smart management. As an ocean scientist, I'm buoyed by federal attention to ocean-based climate actions, and Oregon's Representative Bonamici is at the forefront of these efforts. Thank you. The Congressman's recently enacted Coastal Research Act gives us a blueprint for making targeted investments in innovation, but also partnerships in engaging people that are most impacted by the ocean climate crisis to help build solutions. There is a way forward. I thank Chair Castor, Representative Carter, and Representative Bonamici for this attention in preparing our coastal communities for the challenges ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chan. Next, Dr. Placido, good morning. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chair Castor, Representative Carter, Representative Bonamici. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our climate resilience efforts in the Lower Columbia. I'm Elaine Placido, and as Executive Director of the Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership, I work daily to make real our mission to restore and care for the waters and ecosystems of the Lower Columbia River for current and future generations of fish, wildlife, and people. Over the last 27 years, we have completed a wide variety of programming and projects that improve habitat, foster stewardship, provide objective scientific information, and facilitate consensus to protect Lower Columbia River Estuary. The Columbia River Estuary stretches 146 miles from the Bonneville Dam out the mouth of the river. The Columbia is a working river that is home to nearly 3 million people in the Lower Columbia region. The estuary is also of critical importance to tribal, recreational, and commercial fishers. When Buoy 10 fishing season opens, you can practically walk across the river, not on the backs of salmon, as legends once told, but from boat to boat, as fishers from all around the globe cast their line. The estuary has seen significant impacts from climate change, dams, and land development. Currently, in the estuary, we have documented a stretch of 57 miles where summertime temperatures and a lack of cold water refuge could make the trip upriver lethal, particularly for summer steelhead and fall chinook. We are integrating climate adaptation into our restoration work by taking actions such as using setback levees to open wetland habitat while protecting human infrastructure, building bigger bridges and culverts to accommodate sea level rise and higher flows from more frequent, intense storms, and integrating living shorelines and nature-based solutions to protect against increased flooding. Changing our native plant species mixes to integrate plants that might do better with longer, drier summers, and identifying pockets of cold water that serve as thermal refuge. We are also actively using climate mitigation to shape our work. One of our primary bipartisan infrastructure law projects is to complete an inventory of carbon and methane fluxes in tidal wetlands and help to quantify the impact restoring these wetlands may play in sequestering carbon as a nature-based solution for offsetting greenhouse gases. The connection between our salmon and climate resiliency is this: what is good for our salmon is good for our communities. Right now, life is tough for salmon in the Columbia River Basin. The solution: restore habitat and create cold water refuges. We are in the final stages of the largest restoration project in the Lower Columbia, restoring nearly 1,000 acres of floodplain. In restoring the Steigerwald Lake National Wildlife Refuge, we reconnected a floodplain to the Columbia, decreased flood risk to important public infrastructure, opened hundreds of acres of fish and wildlife habitat, and increased the recreational amenities available to the public by nearly doubling the stretch of trails through the refuge. We also incorporated climate mitigation into this project by identifying the carbon impact of our own restoration work and creating a plan to offset those carbon emissions with increases in planting. This is a huge win for salmon, with increases in the quality and quantity of habitat, but also for people who enjoy the recreational opportunities of this urban wildlife refuge and who now have increased flood protection. We have identified more areas on the Lower Columbia that can be restored to provide flood resilience for people and habitat and cold water refuge for salmon. With the significant investments in the National Estuary Program in recent years, we have the support to begin to develop these projects. Monitoring is also foundational work. It is the most challenging to secure funding for, making the federal investment so very important. Thanks to the unprecedented funding for national estuary programs in the BIL, we intend to expand our research, mapping, and monitoring efforts. With BIL support, we will undertake a multi-year assessment of carbon sequestration potential in the estuary. This information can be used by policymakers to better understand and identify habitat for conservation and restoration. The other action I want to highlight today is environmental education, expanding the knowledge and experiences of current residents and the next generation of decision makers. The Estuary Partnership works with students, providing classroom lessons, field trips, and on-water paddling programs that teach students about watershed health, water quality, stormwater, native plants, and other ecology topics. We also work with students, teachers, parents, and community volunteers to coordinate the planting of more than 10,000 riparian trees and shrubs each year. We know from our assessments that our work makes an impact on measures related to students' knowledge of and their interest in nature. The Estuary Partnership will continue to partner with communities, organizations, and individuals to restore and care for the Columbia River Estuary. The estuary is rich with diverse habitat and communities. We strive to do the work that increases the resilience of the estuary and the people who depend on it for water, food, recreation, and spiritual connection. Thank you to the Select Committee for making this visit to the Lower Columbia and for your support of policy and funding that will positively impact our work in the Columbia's estuary as well as estuaries across the country. Thank you very much for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Dr. Placido, and thank you to all of our witnesses for your very compelling testimony. Now we're going to move to member questions. We're going to have 2 rounds of questions. Each member will get at least 5 minutes. I'll be generous as well. And today we're going to start with Congresswoman Bonamici. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair Castor. And I'm going to start with ocean acidification and hypoxia. Those environmental stressors that are compromising ocean health and endangering our marine ecosystems and coastal communities and fisheries. So Dr. Chan, I want to follow up on the kind comment about the bipartisan work I've done on ocean acidification. In this new legislation that just passed, it's on its way to the President for signature. The bill basically strengthens investments in ocean acidification research and monitoring, but it also establishes the advisory board to increase coordination among stakeholders and designates NOAA as the lead federal agency responsible for implementing the federal response to acidification. And I do want to recognize the partner we have with NOAA, especially with Dr. Spinrad from Oregon State as our NOAA administrator. You mentioned the NOAA-OSU partnership. It is strong, I know that. So Dr. Chan, how will these new policies in this bill and the increased funding for research and development support your work in that partnership and build climate resiliency on our coastline?
Thank you for this question. I think it affects us in a number of ways. One is that it's about expertise. The first federal investment in ocean acidification research, that really allowed a generation of new scientists that, biologists that didn't have the chemistry understanding. We didn't have PhD scientists that really could combine biology and chemistry of ocean acidification very well. Now we have hundreds in this country. We lead the world in that capacity. So incredible capacity building in just a generation. But I think that it's also about, we've got a lot of challenges in climate, of OA, hypoxia, and other aspects of climate change. But it's also an incredible opportunity in that we talked about the need to make for more climate resilient fisheries, but we're also looking ahead to how we can integrate marine renewable energy into this portfolio of things that we're going to do in the ocean. We're also thinking about how to do marine carbon dioxide removal. How can we tap into that potential of the ocean? This is going to take a lot of new skills. We need problem solvers, innovators. Who are going to be the problem solvers and innovators? In my university, I look at students who want to go into science because they love science, but I also have students who are on the sidelines, but they really want to solve problems. And I think these problem solvers are going to be students who really know the value of education. They might be first-generation college students. They might be students they could see that they've been most vulnerable, most affected by climate change. And they're also second career students, veterans that are coming back to the workforce and looking for new challenges. I think these are the new solution builders. So I thank you for investing in people.
That's very exciting. And Dr. Chan, with your leadership, you mentioned, Oregon really is on the front lines. Are you getting inquiries from other researchers around the country and around the globe on the work that OSU and NOAA are doing on ocean acidification?
Absolutely. We are ground zero, which is a bad place to be, but I think we're also ground zero for innovation. And that example of the partnership with fishermen that I described, there's so much more that we can do. On a good year, I might spend 30 days at sea. that's, my dream year. But fishermen that are on the coast, they spend 150, 200, 250 days at sea. They can describe, they see things that I will never see. And they can go to places that will deploy sensors that I will never get to. So we want to work with those partners, and people are, like the East Coast, are asking for help. How do we do that more? How do we tap into that potential partnership?
It's exciting. Thank you. Dr. Placido, as the co-chair of the House Estuary Caucus, I know that the needs of our nation's estuaries are often overlooked and undervalued. Thank you for your testimony. But estuaries are among the world's most productive working ecosystems. According to NOAA, estuaries generate an estimated $12 billion in revenue each year from tourism and local economies. So we have, as you discussed in your testimony as well, these ongoing challenges with acidification, harmful algal blooms, extreme weather events. So you talked about the largest, in your written testimony, the largest restoration project in the Lower Columbia at the Steigerwald Lake National Wildlife Refuge. I had the honor of taking part in the groundbreaking for the restoration project. I'm interested in hearing about that project, how it's going to benefit, how it is benefiting wildlife habitat and public infrastructure, and more generally, how can estuaries help mitigate and adapt to the climate crisis?
Oh, thank you for the question, Representative Bonamici. The Steigerwald Lake National Wildlife Refuge is a fantastic project. As I mentioned in my testimony, it's 1,000 acres of reconnected floodplain to the Columbia River. We wrapped up the majority of our construction late last summer, and over the winter and early this spring, we got to see in action how it's working. There's a couple different kinds of flooding that we're dealing with. One is coming down the Gibbons Creek watershed, and that's surface water flooding. We had a 10-year rain event over the winter right after construction wrapped up, and we were able to see the water fill that new alluvial fan and flood that floodplain the way that it's intended, rather than flooding the homes and costing the Port of Kaminista-Washougal a significant amount of money to pump that water from behind the levees. Earlier this spring, actually, in mid-June, so not that long ago, we had our spring freshet, and we saw about a 5-year flood event on the Columbia. We saw the water from the Columbia come into the refuge as intended and flood about 600 acres of that 1,000-acre floodplain. Worked exactly as designed. Really interesting to see the project work like that so quickly. A couple other interesting points. We were able to work with WashDOT and elevate the state highway there. All of the flood risks for homeowners and commercial interests in the area have decreased. We were able to decrease the flood risk for some public infrastructure, including a stormwater treatment. We removed some setback levees along the river to expand that floodplain, created some expanded habitat areas for fish and wildlife. The actions of creating those and correcting the hydrology in the site, we're able to remove some of the invasive species. And seeing that happen so quickly has been really phenomenal.
That's great. Congratulations. I think my time has expired? Yes. Okay, I yield back. Thank you very much.
Next, we'll go to Rep. Carter. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank all of you for being here and taking time out for this. It's very important. Ms. Bell, I especially want to thank you for being here because I'm really glad to hear that the private sector is recognizing this and is involved in this, and that is climate change, because we're in the federal government, we're not going to be able to solve this problem without help from and buy-in, if you will, from the private sector. As I'm sure you're aware, some of my colleagues may be surprised to learn this, but Georgia is the #1 forestry state in the nation. That's right. 22 million acres of commercially available forest land. And that land serves multiple purposes. As you described in your testimony, Ms. Bell, it includes economic benefits to provide jobs, valued products to our economy, particularly to rural areas. There are also the ecological benefits. The forests serve as carbon sinks and habitats and natural water filters, all of that. And when most people think of preserved land, though, I think they think of federal national parks or wildlife refuge and other federally protected land, but that's not necessarily the case. Most people aren't thinking of the 30,000 acres of restored and conserved land that that you have worked on. Can you go into some more detail as to what the benefits private companies bring to conserving and restoring land rather than through the federal government?
Yes, absolutely. So private sector funding is able to provide capital upfront for projects, really invest a lot, put those projects on the ground, and ensure their success. And with that ensured success, payment comes through mitigation credits, compensatory mitigations, and other ecological desired outcomes. And particularly, the private sector holds themselves to standards that really were developed in conjunction with the Army Corps of Engineers and other federal and state agencies that allow and create a standard for accountability, that being that there are performance-based metrics and outcomes that are required. And Dr. Placido kind of hit on this, that, you know, we do need monitoring. We need to make sure that those projects that are put on the ground do perform as they're planned and do provide the ecosystem services that we have planned for, and that the climate and that the landscape requires and needs. And so the private sector is really able to work on those types of milestone-based projects and invest the capital in that. And there's a big incentive, which is payback. And the private sector has a lot of capital to invest in those types of projects.
Absolutely. And as you pointed out, your work actually complements the missions of regulatory agencies like EPA and the Corps of Engineers and others. Let me ask you, this particular meeting, we're concentrating on coastal resiliency, and that's extremely important. But a lot of your of Westervelt's projects are located outside of the coastal zone. How do inland restored landscapes and working systems contribute to coastal resiliency?
Yeah, I mean, I think the saying that we all live downstream is pretty important. You know, the headwater systems do have a lot of value to coastal communities, and national forest health is really coastal forest health. 30% of drinking water flows through working forests, and forests provide protection of streams and wetlands and other valuable ecosystems that are inland that ultimately contribute to national health. And not to mention the wildlife benefits. We have anadromous and catadromous species that go more inland, and protecting those ecosystems for coastal fisheries can tie into that overall national health as well.
Well, we all know that forests are critical to solving the climate crisis. I always like to say trees are the answer. Trees are the answer. One of my favorite sayings, and you see it all throughout South Georgia. You drive through South Georgia and you'll see a sign that says, when you breathe fresh air, get down on your knees and thank the farmer who planted the trees. And it's true. They serve as carbon sinks. So how exactly do private working forests contribute and compared to other forest types?
Yeah, so, well, private working forests have different sustainability certifications, such as the Sustainable Forest Initiative, that really hold them to standards. And, you know, there are skilled foresters and hydrologists and wildlife biologists that work on private working forests that ensure that they are functioning well for the ecological needs of the landscape. But also, you know, I pointed out earlier that working private forests absorb 15% of U.S. industrial carbon emissions every year, and you know, that they also store an additional 82 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent, and Westervelt's forests alone have 30.4 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent stored within in terms of carbon sequestration.
Good. Well, thank you. We are going to get another round.
Yes.
Because I've got some very important questions.
Great.
Thank you. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. One of the takeaways from our few days here in Oregon that can be model for other communities across the country are the collaborations and partnerships that we have seen in action. When we were in Portland yesterday at Electric Island, you had Daimler, the big truck manufacturer there, with PGE, the electric utility, with the school district, Beaverton School District, with TriMet, community colleges, looking at workforce. Then we went over to the port, and they have a very innovative partnership going on to address the affordable housing crisis and the unhoused through mass timber, cross-laminated timber, working with the Hacienda Corporation to develop communities, OSU, University of Oregon scientists, again, the private sector in forestry trying to solve a problem and help reduce carbon pollution and greenhouse gases all at the same time. And it seems like you have some of the same things going on here in the lower Columbia River Basin with a lot of challenges, whether it's salmon or Dungeness crab. You really struck me, Dr. Chan, by calling it heat waves in the sea, and we know these hypoxic zones are just devastating to marine life, and then they have significant economic consequences as well. So I want to ask all of you, highlight for us how your federal partners can be helpful moving forward, or if you want to highlight some investments in the bipartisan infrastructure law. Give us some good examples on how you all are fostering partnerships, yes, to lower greenhouse gases that are causing the climate crisis, but working on adaptation as well. So, Ms. Dakota, I'll start with you.
Thank you for the question. The tribes in the Columbia River Basin have been engaging in innovative partnerships with many different partners. That includes the federal government, state and local agencies, as well as nonprofit, as well as private industry. And I think, we've come quite a long way from where we were even 20 years ago in terms of when we were in the courts often, and now we are working side by side because I think there's a recognition that we all need water. And water is necessary for municipalities, for river, for recreation, for forests, for wetlands. And how do we all come together to really think about the future of water, quality, quantity, and what it means for tribes, in particular as it relates to salmon and other fishery resources, as well as our first foods, of course, that depend on water. So the tribes really have a holistic view when we think about projects and innovative partnerships, because we know that we can't address a problem in one watershed. We really have to look at the entire basin. That includes the estuary and ocean. And for us, that is an issue where we don't have the expertise, but we're gaining more and more information to help us with our in-river management of these resources. And as co-managers of those resources, we do partner with the federal government. And in the last year, we've seen tremendous allies as well as cooperation from even just the federal agencies coming together for the very first time to talk about the future of the Columbia River Basin. In the past, it's kind of been siloed into various agencies, but this is the first time that we've all really come together, and the federal agencies, because of their trust responsibility to the tribes, are showing up and they're really listening to the tribes' concerns and our recommendations for what we need to do in the future.
You're right, and there is a recognition that we need to do more. In fact, in the Inflation Reduction Act that we're hoping moves through the Senate to the House, provides additional resources for climate change planning, mitigation, adaptation, and resilience to insular areas. So I hope we'll be able to follow through just on your recommendations. Ms. Bell.
Yes, we work very closely with the government in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's for our regulatory requirements that really drive our industry in trying to get some more streamlined and consistent and stable guidance at the federal, state, and local levels. The government is often a client of ours in big infrastructure projects, so we provide valuable mitigation credits and permitting responsible mitigation projects to allow for the build out of those projects. And then also we are actually working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and tribal nations on a First Foods initiative, so giving access to tribes to first foods that may occur on the landscapes that we restore. And so that's a pilot project. And so the government is a stakeholder in many, many different ways, and actually allows for the facilitation of us to work with a lot of other groups.
Thank you. Dr. Chan.
Well, I think as we move forward with the climate crisis, we need authoritative information. We need people that can produce information that all of us can trust about what are the changes ahead and what are the best ways to move forward. And I'm excited because I work with NOAA day in and day out, and that's an authoritative agency for providing us the best information that we need. At the same time, I get to work with some really, really brilliant people in academia, but my job is to help them how to tap into that brilliance and exciting science to point us towards mission science. So that combination allows us to sustain the observations that we need, the research we need, but also keep bringing in innovation from the academic community so that we can do things better in a way that's more cost effective or gives us even better answers.
Thank you. Dr. Placido.
We're fortunate to work on a regular basis with partners at EPA, NOAA, the Corps of Engineers, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, and both states, and many local and nonprofit partners. From our close partnership with EPA in particular, I think some of the things that we see on a regular basis, and we're really feeling that with their work that they've done with us in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And not only is it kind of pushing us to leverage those federal dollars, and National Estuary Programs average about $22 for every $1 of federal investment, which I think is really important to us, but focusing on climate resilience and environmental justice, and kind of building our expertise in those areas has been appreciated.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go back to Rep. Bonamici for another round.
Thank you so much, Chair Castor. Ms. Dakota, when the Select Committee was crafting the Climate Action Plan, we had a hearing on indigenous ecological knowledge. We investigated how indigenous peoples not only disproportionately experience the effects of climate change, as you mentioned in your testimony, but also how tribal members are also leaders in addressing the climate crisis. Tribes are using traditional knowledge and scientific inquiry to help us build resilience and adaptation efforts. So can you talk about how traditional tribal ecological knowledge can help shape the approach to natural resource management, but how can Congress and the federal government better support your efforts and integrate that traditional knowledge more broadly into federal policy?
Thank you for the question. As you mentioned in my testimony, tribes are one of the most climate-sensitive communities in the world because we do depend on our resources. Our resources are our cultural resources, and we have been adapting for generations and thousands of years to a changing climate. So this is not new for us. We have a word for it, of course, but it's something that we've been doing because we really operate on a cycle of a seasonal round of when we harvest our first foods. And we've seen these timings come earlier and earlier, or we've seen the snowpack come later and later, and so it is affecting timing of all of our first foods, and so we've been seeing that. My organization is different and innovative in that we have incorporated through our restoration plan called Waikanashmi Wakishwit that looks at the entire life cycle of salmon, and is the only restoration plan in the Columbia Basin that does so, where we incorporate our knowledge, our general knowledge of our place and our land that we've had for generations and generations. We've also incorporated that into our science. And so we have, excuse me, not only the coastal monitoring and estuary program that we recently acquired, but we also have our own genetics laboratory doing world-class genetics research on our salmon, our fish, in our rivers. And so we have been able to combine our traditional ecological knowledge with Western science to promote recommendations on the ground and to adapt to climate change and to provide projections for the future. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Dr. Chan, I was inspired to hear your excitement about the innovation, the new students you're working with, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of workforce development pipeline. When you are working with your students, you talked about the citizen scientists who are out there working with the fishing community, but can you talk a little bit about the workforce issues, the jobs that are available, and how students can learn about those jobs and take advantage of the skills that they're learning at OSU, and what kinds of careers are available to them? How are we going to meet the workforce demands as we're addressing the climate crisis, and what a difference preparation in an educational program like that you offer at Oregon State? How can that prepare people for the wealth of jobs that are out there?
Right. So on the science side, there are things that we need. For example, if we're going to, as we move into wind power, how we monitor that effectively? We use autonomous vehicles to do that? If we want to do marine carbon dioxide removal, how do we evaluate that that's really effective and worth the money? That's going to need new technology. And I think one key take-home is that the blue high-tech industry is just the high-tech industry in all your district, but actually just a little more exciting. When I talked with my partner in Salem, he's a technology business, he said, we can build these sensors, but what if I said we had to go up to 8,000 meters full ocean depth? He's like, on the I-5 corridor, some of the best high-precision titanium casting in this, businesses are right there down the road. So we can work with all the other high-tech industries within the country to, really stimulate this new blue high-tech sector. And when I have a student come work with me, they might take classes and they might go look for a job and say, oh, I took 4 years of chemistry and physics. They might get a job, but what I want them to do is say, you can say, I worked on a project where we built a new sensor that fit into a crab pot. It's a video sensor, and we use artificial intelligence to process the signal before we sent it up. I think that student will get the job. That's a proven problem solver. And at OSU, there's a scale benefit because we have an innovation lab at Hatfield. We have some state-of-the-art fabrication equipment, and we're letting undergraduates and graduate students come work with us with industry. The exciting thing is that if they figure something out, they can build one about the size of a table. But if we need 1,000 or we need something that is 10 times the size, we have a high-tech industry that are ready to upscale that fabrication. So we get to be the laboratory to develop these new tools.
Thank you. And as I yield back, I just wanted to say thank you, because when we talk about addressing the climate crisis, we need to be talking about the jobs and preparing people to fill those important jobs. So thank you for your work, and I yield back.
Yeah, and thank you, Rep. Bonamici, for your special focus on workforce, not just for this part of the country, but your leadership in the Congress that will help lift people all across America. Next, Representative Carter, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Ms. Bell, private companies buying into this, extremely important, and that's what I want to concentrate on. How can this committee make a difference? How can we make a difference on climate issues? What are the best ways? What can we do? What are the best things we can do to assist the private sector in helping us to achieve what is all of our goals? All of us recognize climate change. All of us want the same end result, to protect our environment. I have the honor and privilege of representing the entire coast of Georgia, where I've lived all my life, where I intend to live the rest of my life. I want my children, my grandchildren, to enjoy that environment, just as I have. What can we do? What can this committee do to assist the private sector in helping us with our common goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think that nature doesn't recognize for-profit or nonprofit or, whoever's doing the landscape-based solutions and bringing that to the table. It's all a common goal, which I think that Chair Castor, you mentioned earlier. We're all working towards the same goal, which is to increase climate resilient projects on the landscape, and really, try to expand that footprint and get to a more historic footprint that can help with these climate resiliency efforts. And so just expanding opportunities for the private sector to let them come to the table and access some public restoration dollars, whether it's through, housing and urban development or FEMA monies or whatnot. We can efficiently spend those monies to put resilient projects on the ground that are going to last and be protected in perpetuity, which is one of the standards that we have to, operate by. And so really, I think expanding those opportunities to the private sector, and then also just reliable regulations, environmental
How important
regulations.
is that, the regulations?
It's incredibly important for us because it seems like the pendulum is just swinging from side to side every 4 to 8 years, and that affects our industry greatly. We need compensatory mitigation, and we need the government to support that and require development mitigate appropriately, and that's important for the landscape as well.
Good. Let me ask you something else. I'm very interested in your work that you mentioned about restoring wetlands, and we all understand, particularly in South Georgia, South Carolina, the low country, if you will, how important wetlands are, and providing mitigation offsets for that. In your testimony, you say that mitigation offsets provided by Westervelt Ecological Services has helped important public infrastructure projects gain approval from regulators, allowing these projects to begin in a timely manner. And we all know how difficult infrastructure projects are, particularly when we start talking about the impact on wetlands and getting through that and everything. Could the expansion of mitigation projects by the private sector be used to help move infrastructure projects along at a timelier pace?
Yeah, absolutely. With the investment in more restoration on the landscape, we can produce more credits, which can almost instantaneously provide permit compliance requirements. So mitigation credits are needed to have a permit approved. And if you're having to create individual projects on the landscape, with each development project, it takes a long time. But with banking, it's a matter of 2 or 3 days. And we've provided all the mitigation for the California High-Speed Rail project and really efficiently done so to help that project along and make sure that it is in fact developed. And the same goes for Colorado Department of Transportation, Nebraska Department of Transportation, Alabama Department of Transportation. We've got projects going on the ground in Georgia as well, which I'm excited about because we share the same alma mater of UGA. And so, it's really important, to get those projects on the ground so that we can efficiently and effectively support the development of infrastructure projects and private projects and non-government projects and anything that may need an offset to progress their goals.
Well, again, I want to thank you for being here, Ms. Bell, and all the witnesses for being here, and thank you, Representative Bonamici, for hosting us here, and Chair Castor for having this. Folks, this is important. We all agree that climate change, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, climate change has got to be addressed, and it is extremely important. But there are other important things in our lives as well. Today is August 3rd. Exactly 1 month from today, on September 3rd, the Oregon Ducks will travel to Atlanta to play in the Chick-fil-A Bowl. Ms. Bell, do you have any comment on that?
I would love to be there. I love that.
Go Dogs. And with that, I'll yield.
Thank you, Rep. Carter of Georgia. All of the witnesses have done an outstanding job of highlighting your work here in Oregon on adaptation to the climate crisis. But I think we cannot divorce what you all are doing on adaptation from the urgent need to reduce greenhouse gases and reduce the carbon footprint that's really driving so much of the cost and the impact, whether it's these horrendous wildfires or God bless the people in Kentucky after this outrageous colossal rain event where people lost their lives, or just everyday Americans that have to work in extreme heat. All of us being at the mercy of autocrats like Vladimir Putin, who wields his oil and gas supply like a weapon. And we know the world's top scientists have said there is a rapidly closing window for action to reduce human-caused greenhouse gases and address the climate crisis. So could you all, I'll go across the board here again, highlight to me some of the things you're doing when it comes to adaptation that you think also is having a corresponding impact in reducing the carbon footprint and greenhouse gases. Oregon, again, is a leader in the country on your clean energy goals, but highlight to me some of the projects that you're proud of in this area that can also be models for the country. Ms. Dakota.
Thank you for the question. I'd like to highlight, and I mentioned this in our written testimony and my oral testimony, but we recently released in February this year an update to our tribal energy vision. And as I said before, we recognize that many of the threats that face our salmon are the result of production and consumption of energy. And we know firsthand because of the way the Columbia Basin now looks in terms of the hydropower that it holds. So we have 4 broad goals in our tribal energy vision that I'll briefly go over. One is to create a regional energy portfolio that protects and enhances our environmental quality, our treaty-protected resources from the tribes, and supports the restoration of the basin's fish and wildlife to healthy and harvestable populations, and that's important because in order to harvest them, they need to be healthy. We would like to prevent new and reduce ongoing damage to the basin's resources, including fish, wildlife, water quality, our cultural resources, by recognizing the relationships and interdependencies of natural and built systems within the Northwest Energy System. The third goal is to provide increased protection for fish and wildlife and utility customers against unanticipated events such as drought, fire, market aberrations, while providing an adequate and economical, reliable electric supply. And finally, to mitigate climate change impacts to protect the Northwest ecosystems by replacing fossil fuels, electric generation, and reducing the reliance on fossil fuel for power, transportation, and other uses.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bell?
Yes, on the Pacific Coast, we have multiple projects. We have 20,000 acres in California that are relatively close to the coastline, that are in restoration, perpetually conserved restoration projects. And that is a big footprint to help with flood amelioration, drought, coastal sea level issues. And a lot of those are tidally influenced. We are also working with a public utility company in Oregon on a project we're under contract with to help with mitigation offsets, but also that will result in putting over 1,000 acres of restoration on the ground. And, that also will provide regional climate benefits as well. So as far as, restoration on the ground and the way that it contributes to regionally to global climate change, we are trying to put some real ecologically functioning sites on the ground in the Pacific area.
And yesterday we did hear from scientists and those in industry on how important it is for forest management in reducing carbon pollution, just the extent that that greenhouse gases explode in some of these massive wildfires. So that's important. Dr. Chan.
Thank you. At OSU, we run a facility called PacWave. It's a site offshore for marine renewable development. And it's a permitted site so that private industry can come and test their best ideas in the ocean, because that's, if it works, if it survives the Pacific Ocean, then we know it's going to survive. And that's an exciting area where we can actually change the energy portfolio that we have. The other thing that we can do, and I just had a really fun conversation with a colleague in NOAA yesterday, is that let's think about generating alkalinity so that we can use the ocean to draw down more carbon dioxide, so go carbon negative. And we can use marine renewable energy to power those processes that generates alkalinity, and we can use the force of the Columbia, perhaps, to distribute that alkalinity. So there's ideas out there that we need to think hard and make sure that they work well, and we need to do it in consultation with people that are affected. But as long as everybody's on the table, I would bet for our ability to solve this.
Thank you. Dr. Pasito.
I already mentioned several actions that we take with our restoration work, so I want to think a little bit about some of the things that we do outside of our restoration work, including green infrastructure and stormwater projects with local communities. We work with school districts to do depaving events on school grounds. It's fantastic projects, reduce some of that impervious surface and plant more trees, create green space. It provides some islands of cool air during warm summers that we're seeing more increasingly. We also restore riparian areas. Over this last year, including the work that we did at Steigerwald National Wildlife Refuge, we planted over 500,000 trees. That's a lot of trees, so I'm in complete agreement with Representative Carter that trees are very, very important.
Well, thank you again to all of our witnesses. I also want to thank my colleagues, Congressman Carter of Georgia, and your climate champion from right here in Northwest Oregon, Suzanne Bonamici. It's been a pleasure and an honor to serve with both of you and work on climate solutions. I want to thank everyone here at Clatsop Community College for hosting us, and the people of Astoria. Thank you to the folks in the audience who have come to hear our discussion on climate solutions today. I also want to thank the folks who traveled from Washington, D.C. with the House recording studio to make sure that this hearing from Astoria, Oregon could be transmitted across the country. And thanks to the local radio broadcast as well for making this available to the citizens of Oregon. Thank you to the professional staff who have worked very hard on this field hearing. I know that this is here in Oregon, you don't get a lot of congressional hearings. I know that you're tuned into C-SPAN, though, on a regular basis, and I encourage you to do so, to follow the work of our Select Committee on the climate crisis. Our website is climatecrisis.house.gov. At that website, you will be able to monitor our progress. A few years ago, we released a climate crisis action plan. After over a year of outreach, broad outreach across the country from scientists, tribal leaders, the faith community, innovators, we traveled and we heard recommendations. We've compiled all that into a climate crisis action plan, and on our website now you'll be able to track our progress. We had 750 recommendations in that plan. As of today, we have passed over 400 of those recommendations in the House of Representatives, and over 200 have been enacted into law and contained in the bipartisan infrastructure law, the new CHIPS and Science bill that was passed just last week, through the National Defense Authorization Act, through the appropriations bills, and now there's a big climate bill pending in the United States Senate, the Inflation Reduction Act, that hopefully we can get across the finish line as well. But we need your continued input and advice, and that's why it's so invaluable to be able to travel here to Oregon to hear directly from you. Thank you again. And at this time, are there any unanimous consent requests? If not, we will call the hearing adjourned. Thanks again.
I almost did a little go Ducks, but